Skip to main content. Explore what it takes to make the healthcare system work. Reporting from the frontiers of health and medicine. Reports. Molly Ferguson for Stat. Washington when President Trump unveiled Operation Warp Speed in May, he declared that it was unlike anything our country has seen since the Manhattan Project, the initiative to accelerate the development of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics lacks the scale and the degree of secrecy of the effort to build the atomic bomb. But Operation Warp Speed is largely an abstraction in Washington, with little known about who works there other than its top leaders, or how it operates. Even pharmaceutical companies hoping to offer help or partnerships have labored to figure out who to contact. Now, an organizational chart of the $10 billion initiative, obtained by Stat, reveals the fullest picture yet of Operation Warp Speed, a highly structured organization in which military personnel vastly outnumber civilian scientists. The labyrinthine chart, dated July 30th, shows that roughly 60 military officials including at least 4 generals are involved in the leadership of Operation Warp Speed, many of whom have never worked in health care or vaccine development. Just 29 of the roughly 90 leaders on the chart aren't employed by the Department of Defense. Most of them work for the Department of Health and Human Services and its subagencies. Operation Warp Speed's central goal is to develop, produce, and distribute 300 million doses of a coronavirus vaccine by January. And the military is intimately involved, according to Paul Mango, HHS Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. It has already helped prop up more than 24 vaccine manufacturing facilities, flying in equipment and raw materials from all over the world. It has also set up significant cybersecurity and physical security operations to ensure an eventual vaccine is guarded very closely from state actors who don't want us to be successful in this, he said, adding that many of the warp speed discussions take place in protected rooms used to discuss classified information. This is a massive scientific and logistical undertaking, said Mango. We are weeks away, at most, a month or 2 away from having at least one safe and effective vaccine. Despite the military's dominance, the chart also includes Nancy Messonnier, the director of the CDC, adding that many of the warp speed discussions take place in protected rooms used to discuss classified information. This is a massive scientific and logistical undertaking, said Mango. We are weeks away, at most, a month or 2 away from having at least one safe and effective vaccine. Despite the military's dominance, the chart also includes Nancy Messonnier, the director of the CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, who was almost fired by Trump in February for warning the public about the growing COVID-19 pandemic. Public health and drug industry officials told Stat that Messonnier and General Paul Ostrovsky, her direct superior, serve as the initiative's main contacts on all questions related to the distribution of an eventual vaccine. One public health official said that Ostrovsky, an expert on military acquisition, defers to Messonnier on matters of public health. The military's extensive involvement in the development and distribution of a vaccine is a departure from pandemics of the past, but it is fitting for Trump, who has gushed about his love for my military.
So I just want to point out the person that wrote this article isn't exactly for Trump. So we can get that out of the way. My generals, my this. From what I remember, whenever Trump got elected, when he was going against Clinton, it was a whole bunch of generals that were around him because they did not want Clinton's her exact I don't know how you'd put that, State Department or her what she saw as the future of the world for her. So then supposedly you had the generals that got Trump and backed him and got him in there. So the guy that wrote this wrote Trump and my generals. I don't want to keep interrupting here, but if you watch, it's going to go down and it's going to talk about Slaoui, Slaoui. He came from Smith Klein Beecham and had to do with their vaccinations. Tried to come up with a vaccination for Ebola, failed at it. They didn't care. They built him a big building, named it after him. Well, while Regina Dugan, and it's right on my channel, you can look and see, while Regina Dugan's talking to Yahoo Finance before an emergency use authorization has even been approved, she's talking, and beneath her name it says DARPA ceded the ground for COVID-19 vaccinations. Then right next to her head, a stock ticker's going off that say BioNTech, Pfizer, Moderna, and I can't remember now. You have to forgive me. You'll see it. It's the 5 up there. Okay, and she starts bragging. Oh well, as you know, DARPA was brought in under Sputnik to keep from ICBMs from reaching over here just in case, because of the Sputnik satellite that was the size of a basketball. And then she gets into 2010 and she goes, a gentleman by the name of such and such, I forgot his name, came up and said, well, you know, if this happens, we're going to be in all kinds of trouble. What if we came up with mRNA vaccines? And she says, well, yeah. And people will say, well, she said, well, people would say, well, that wouldn't work. And she goes, well, I don't have anything that says that it will or will not work. So she gets into all that, but then she discusses that Moderna was 3 people that got a donation, got a grant from DARPA. And those 3 people came up with the RNA jab, as you'd put it. Moderna has never put out a product since the COVID-19 jab. So then she starts bragging about how the RNA vaccine was the best thing in the 20th century, like the 5th best thing besides fluorinated water, going to the moon, GPS, and all this. But then she gets into speaking about how, okay, because the ladies are asking her questions on Yahoo Finance. Well, of course, you know, this hasn't been done fast enough to for safety or whatever. And then she gets into, well, we were only charged with, is it a possibility? We weren't charged with anything about the safety, she starts talking about. And then she says, well, it went from 3 people to where the time that they got the virus, the isolate for the virus, I thought it was 4 days. It was actually 2 days. The Moderna came up with the actual jab. And that's because if you listen to the Stat News report on here, Operation Warp Speed was conducted by the Department of Defense. On the main pillar was Montez Slaoui. He came off of Moderna's board to step on top of Warp Speed. He gave up his SmithKline Beecham profits, but he didn't give up his Moderna profits. And if you look at the 2 pillars under that, you have a guy that's in the Army's Hall of Fame for logistics. If you eat, sleep, shoot, drive, whatever, we provide it. And then another guy named Matt Hepburn, who cut his teeth at DARPA under Regina Dugan on biosensors for detecting when you got sick days before. So somehow he made it to there. Okay, she's on there, and then at the same time they're running that because they got a hierarchical diagram of what the sheet was going to look like for warp speed. So he takes it to Harvard, and this guy at Harvard tells him, "Oh no, it's difficult. It is pretty complicated, but this is pretty complicated what they're doing here." And it's when you get into the whole thing, they start telling you about who's up how many hours and who's up this. Well, in that article itself, the one general, he says, we're not doing any science here, none. Okay? On March 3rd, 2020, in Defense One, which is a military magazine, March 3rd, 2020, Mark Milley came out and said that they were going to work with Profusa to use that biosensor to see up to 2 to 3 weeks before a warfighter or anybody else got sick. Okay? This has been going on, though, back since like 2009. Now, who owns Profusa? Profusa was first, I think, got into by 3E BioVentures, which is a Beijing-based company. Then you got Ben Wong. Then you got the lady's name. I'll get the name for you. The lady's name that's on the board there. She's on the board over to Sweden. Okay, she's got that because she's a woman in charge. I don't care who gets mad about this. It's the same thing with putting people in front of other people because of their color or their race. To me. So anyways, 3E BioVentures out of Beijing is the one who funded Profusa. Then you got the UK. If you don't know about the UK and the COST program, COST, you better look up COST, capital letters. Because back in around, I don't know, early Obama administration, right after Clinton and that, Clinton put in the National Nanotech Initiative. Right after he apologized for injecting plutonium into warfighters' arms and putting ionized radiation on orphan children's cereal and a whole lot of different things. He gets asked about that, and okay, so he opens up some declassified documents. These ladies work their butt off going through there. He walks in like into one of the rooms of the White House. You can look it up. Say Clinton apologizes for injecting warfighters with ionized radiation. And he's going to get up there and start talking about how the reason he did that is because the American people need the trust of their government. So he was going to make sure that happened. But then he turned right around. When he got off the podium, he said that he was going to kick up bioethics commissions, which is a joke. If you get into Obama's 2011 bioethics commission, it's got almost every single agency you can think of on board. And I could let you read what they wrote how they wrote Dear Commenter, this Valerie Bonham. Okay, but Clinton signed in the National Nanotech Initiative. Gore signed in on getting the internet, the information superhighway that he created. Obama signed into the BRAIN initiative, which was already done, because see, the Wellcome Trust is the one that forked over the cash for the human genome, and DARPA did it. All the nanotechnology was done under COST, mostly, done over in the UK, COST, capital. Now you can look up the COST Compact, COMPACT program, and that gets into misinformation and gets into all this conspiracy theory shit. But then you get into Trump's administration. He signed in the he signed in the Artificial Intelligence Initiative, and then when Biden got in, he changed it and signed into the Artificial Intelligence Initiative, And then him and Harris have a Kamala Harris Biden artificial intelligence initiative. But you see, DARPA was doing what they call the read for the human genome read. Now all of a sudden it's human genome write, WRITE. And besides all that, it wouldn't even matter. You'd have to read it. All the people as of 2023 that brought in, whether it be DeepMind, OpenAI, everything they brought in, Lambda, they all brought all that in. Google, Bard, everything they brought in. And then all the people that had anything to do with that, Sam Altman, all the people with Google, all the people with Alphabet, they signed in a thing that says, okay, for the extinction of the human race. This gets so far out there, really. But at the same time that the government through CISA and everybody was censoring everybody, they had already had all the censoring back. You can go down to New Orleans to a commission. You can go to Pisa in 2022, and you can go to the bioengineering conference. The Russian Federation didn't miss that one. If you go to 2016 to the Bellagio, to the Rockefeller's Bellagio Conference Center, there was USAID, NIAID, there was Nigeria, there was the Chinese Department of Health, there was Merck, there was Metabiota. If you don't know about Hunter Biden, maybe you kick back into that one. There is so much that you'd have to go back. I'm getting caught up here because there's so much information on my mind that I probably need to slow down and go through these slow, but I'm not going to. Because now we have a genocide on our hands. 3 days before that, look on my channel, you'll see on Fox News, you'll see Bill Gates saying, oh, we don't have to worry about global warming. At most, the temperature's not even going to get up to 2 degrees. It won't even get to that. It's not going to do any harm, he's saying. So then the next day, I get a thing from Fox because I post that. I get a thing from YouTube telling me, okay, Fox doesn't want me to post that, but they're not striking me for content. So I think about it, and I'm like, okay, well, it's not their content then. So I took that and I put it back up, and 3 days before October 7th, I put up, be very vigilant because this guy, Bill Gates, has no problems playing the villain. He'll get pies in the face, he'll get everything else. He doesn't care. He doesn't change his mind. He's changed his mind. There's something that he had to change his mind about. I had no idea. And I'm sure most people had no idea that this is what was going to come up. But now we're sitting, we've thrown, I guess we've thrown Ukraine to the side. We don't care about that anymore. We're letting Israel tell the United States what they're going to do while we're the ones in the Red Sea and the ones backing them. Do the people of the United States not realize that after this gets all done, these people aren't going to drop to their knees and say thank you? They're going to think about how you and I would think, how if your whole family got killed, your whole block, your whole city, and what towns had to do with it. It's getting insane, folks. There is no justification for a war crime or a crime against humanity. None. And if you go through my channels, I hope that Harris remembers that.
My military, and my generals. While the military was tangentially involved in public health crises like the H1N1 pandemic of 2009, some public health leaders have raised concerns about what they see as their marginalization during the pandemic. One senior federal health official told Stat he was struck by the presence of soldiers in military uniforms walking around the health department's headquarters in downtown Washington, and said that recently he has seen more than 100 officials in the corridors wearing Desert Storm fatigues. Military personnel won't be familiar with the health resources available in a community, said John Auerbach, CEO of Trust for America's Health, a group closely aligned with public health. They don't know who the doctors are or where the community health centers are located or what resources they have. They don't know where the pharmacies are. Public health people do know, that's part of what they do. The July 30th Operation Warp Speed organizational chart obtained by Stat details about 90 of the officials involved in the initiative. Roughly 60 work for the Department of Defense. Military officials, however, contend that the U.S. Army excels at complex challenges like distributing vaccines that might need to be transported at sub-zero temperature. And HHS.
Okay, they talk about being transported at sub-zero temperature. Here in a few minutes in this article, they're going to say, talk about how all these people are running around in Desert Storm fatigues, except for the 20-something of which came from HHS, which is oversees the PrEP Act, which was never even signed in yet. And if you go down, it says that different pharmaceutical companies and different biotech companies were trying to get a hold of Washington or anybody to try to help, to see if they could be of help, and that they had no idea of who to get a hold of. Then they talk to the one general, and the general tells the guy doing the story, we're not doing any science here. None. Zero. Then they get on off the pillars, off the one guy, and the one guy, Matt Hepburn, done work for DARPA, guess what, on biosensors that would tell you before you got sick to put into warfighters. So he was kicked into number 2 or number 3 on warp speed. You got Slowy that came off of Moderna's board to take ultimate control of warp speed. He had top control. He had like 5 pillars all dropped out underneath the Department of Defense. Now here's what gets me. If you go back to MH370 and you go back to when they left Malaysia and you look at that flight pattern, but if you look after that and Freescale Semiconductors, they had all their eggs in one basket. I don't know what kind of technology they had on there. I just know that they had a technology that was working with some kind of radar or something that the DOD had high interest in. But why would you put all your eggs, they came out of Texas, why would you put all your eggs in one basket on a flight like that, number one? Because the only person that didn't have rights to the patent after that plane went down and they couldn't find anybody was Rothschild. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, this is fact. Now, Freescale Semiconductor turned into NXP. And if you start getting into who is on NXP's board, or if you start going to Harvard, or if you start going to Stanford's virality project, or if you start going into Harvard's, what was that called, to block out the sun. It's so crazy. Because then you got John Brennan sitting at the Council on Foreign Relations saying, there is something that I'm very interested in that. And that is stratospheric injection of the atmosphere to keep the sun's rays out. But then he says, it's not going to have anything to do with our global warming problem, but it will buy us some time. So, I mean, like, he's talking about dumping because Bill Gates paid Harvard engineers to come up with this, to start doing it over Sweden And Sweden waited till the last second and backed out of it and said, "Oh no, no, we changed our mind." It's some kind of calcium, calcium bicarbonate. That's baking soda, but you start getting into coal ash and things like that. I don't know there. I'm just saying, I don't think it's a very good idea before they have a clue what they're doing to get up there and start spraying out stratospheric aerosol injections. And for people that don't think that chemtrails can exist, then why don't you look up Project Popeye out of Vietnam? Or why don't you look up the zinc cadmium sulfide with phosphorescent radium in it over St. Louis, or Corpus Christi. In Corpus Christi, they did it out of airplane sprayers. In St. Louis, they did it out of sprayers on top of buildings that held like 10,000 people, 7,000 of which were under 12. They put it in parks. They put it everywhere. They did it in Canada. I went to school. Where I went to school, they enriched uranium-235 and 238. This is after that they had the world's biggest TNT plant that was making 1 million pounds of TNT a day, right next to a school where I went to school, and a wildlife. It's called August A. Bush Wildlife Area. That they put in, donated, dug a bunch of lakes, and then put in a whole bunch of bunkers. But they never stored any TNT there because at 1 million pounds a day, the biggest on the earth, they couldn't keep up with demand. Now, I'm sitting there as a teenager, going on to 30-something years after all this, and I'm looking out my physics window, and I'm literally standing there with a Geiger counter with some chips given by the electrical company around here, taking Geiger readings, when they came in and they did a super fun project on this. This is out of Mallinckrodt Chemical Works out of St. Louis, because the 2 bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki both were enriched with the yellow cake that came from right out here at Weldon Spring, Missouri. That's where it came from. The only thing that's built next door is a school. You could throw a baseball from the school to it. And I watched it for over 40 years rust straight into the ground. It's still rusting there. There's fires under the ground that are going off that have went on for 2 decades that are getting close to the radiation. So there you've got them spraying radioactive material in the sky, milled down to get to the deepest part of the lung, saying that it's for a smoke screen for Russian nukes so they can do testing. Then they took from Agent Orange, from where they were manufacturing that in Missouri, and they took that and they sold that off to a subcontractor out the back door, and they dumped it all over what's called Times Beach, Missouri, all over the streets to keep the dust down off the gravel roads. They ended up, you could go down the highway on St. Louis here, and that whole place was roped off like the moon for years. It was the biggest, because dioxin is the most, from what I used to know, dioxin is the most hazardous material that can be made synthetically on the face of the earth. And they just dumped it all over these gravel roads, all over where people were living, all over neighborhoods. So St. Louis is like ground zero. If you look up Operation LAC, you're going to find that this is ground zero for aerosols, and it's not good aerosols. For the people that might think about the fires that are going on in Hawaii and California, you might want to look up like NASA, NARSTO, NARSTO, that has to do with aerosol flights, or you might want to look up FireX, which is underneath of NOAA, the meteorological, sorry for my explanation for that. I'm kind of tired here, but we'll go on.
An HHS spokesperson declined to comment directly on the chart, citing precedent that the agency does not comment on leaked documents.
It also says in here that will say that that the military already has hundreds of thousands of not yet approved, even by the FDA, by EUA, stockpiled jabs. Because see, what they did is they took the envelope from this RNA, the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction test, the RT, the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reduction test. That was never meant to tell. It was by the cycles a second. They can't even tell after they came out. They came out on March 3rd. If you look up on all these drops I have on Profusa, they already knew that they couldn't tell the difference between pneumonia, RSV, the different variants of corona. But they said it again on March 3rd. They said on March 1st of 2020, March 3rd of 2020, March 5th of 2020. Now, if you look at that, look up what a challenge study is. And look up on an EUA, look if there even can be an EUA. Under 2009 or 4's Project BioShield, but if you look at 2016 and you look at that at Wikipedia, it will tell you straight out in the first two paragraphs, we cannot give this to a human being because there is no emergency use authorization, so they go to the animal rule. Because there's no way for them to guarantee that can be safe because they never tested it. Which I thought was kind of funny because they used Kaiser Permanente to test the few that they did at the beginning of 2020, which goes back into Morgellons.
Documents. But the spokesperson noted that at least 600 HHS officials are involved in Warp Speed. The majority of those employees are not captured by the chart obtained by STAT. Among the decision makers not included in the chart are Mango and HHS Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Bob Kodlik. Mango told STAT that he and Kodlik personally sign off on every business agreement made by HHS for Operation Warp Speed. Mango, he also defended.
What does that matter that the guy signs off on everything? Because on one, you'll get into here too, where it says that they've got hundreds of thousands of vaccines waiting that have never even been approved, never been tested. You got Regina Dugan that's walking onto Wellcome Leap out of the Wellcome Trust, the people that funded the Human Genome under DARPA's tutelage, that are under Human Genome Right, then underneath, like I said, Clinton and the National Nanotech Initiative, or the fact that they released, and he also told the people in the audience there, hey, he had their families and the people that were already dead, and he said, we're going to get you some kind of monetary, grievance for this because this wasn't right. As far as I've been last told, they hadn't received a dime. And as far as like 3 months ago, right after this stuff started in Israel, because Josh Hawley's been all over it so hard, there was probably over 200 different news articles about what's going on out here in St. Louis, which as far as them dropping zinc cadmium sulfide, saying, oh, it wasn't harmful. Well, tell that to the watch dial makers, that the ladies that lick the paintbrush with the zinc cadmium sulfide to make the watch dial glow, and they're all dead.
Distribute 300 million doses of a coronavirus vaccine by January. The initiative has poured $10 billion into the clinical development and manufacturing of potential vaccine candidates, and it has stockpiled hundreds of thousands of doses of as yet unproven immunizations. Warp Speed has deals with 6 major drug companies hoping to develop COVID-19 vaccines and may seek more, the group's chief advisor, Moncef Slaoui, told STAT earlier. Security. Undercurrent are processes.
Moncef Slaoui.
Faster, advanced speed grant.
Moncef Slaoui sits on the board of Moderna. So they pulled him off Moderna's board to give Moderna one of the main contracts besides J&J and Pfizer and BioNTech. But they knew he had stock because it says he had stock from GlaxoSmithKline. But see, I've got on with GPT-4, 3, all those, ask different people, and nobody has any idea. Now, if you get deep enough in this article here, it'll get down here and it'll say SiO2, which is the name for silicon dioxide, which is what they handled the vaccine in, which is who BARDA, which it says in this document. On the strangest part of the whole document is BARDA. I'll show you I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. I just would like to try to get this out.
Speed grantee to force a vendor to cut production time from 75 days to just 7. It also leveraged its contract with Warp Speed to get its power turned on in the midst of a massive outage in just minutes. Others had to wait days, according Lawrence Ganti, the company's chief business officer. Operation Warp Speed also covered the costs of installing 32 new security cameras around the company's facility after an assessment found the company's physical security was lacking. CO2 received $143 million from Operation Warp Speed, a fraction of what larger companies have received, but the company still is required to provide monthly status reports to the government. The reports typically run up to 60 pages and are coupled with a 4-hour meeting attended by multiple Warp Speed officials. According to Ganti, that's in addition to bi-weekly risk reports and weekly site visits from the Army Corps of Engineers. A second company funded by Warp Speed confirmed similar reporting requirements. Everybody has, or at least I had, a stereotype of how the government operated. 9 to 5, slow, kind of what you'd expect at the DMV. This is not that in any way, said Ganti. They seem to be working 24/7. The organizational chart also underscores which agencies are not as closely involved in the leadership of the effort, namely, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which took a leading role in coordinating vaccine distribution for other past pandemics, like the H1N1 pandemic of 2009. There are at least 3 staffers from each of the administration's other major health agencies, like the Biomedical Advanced Research and Basis would say the CDC is leading and the DoD is enabling and supporting. Chief Pentagon spokesperson Jonathan Hoffman struck a similar tone. The Department of Defense has been clear in its role in Operation Warp Speed. We are providing the bandwidth of logistical expertise, including program management and contracting proficiency to this all-of-America effort, he said in a statement. The development and delivery of over 300 million vaccine doses harnesses public-private partnerships, academia, and industry. No one entity can do this alone. The Pentagon also declined to comment on the chart obtained by STAT, saying they do not comment on leaked documents. The Food and Drug Administration is also largely absent from the organizational chart, though that is by design.
See, it wouldn't matter whether the FDA was on the list or not on the list, because once you have an EUA and you have an emergency use authorization, there's no way for them to do any tests to tell what's going to happen long-term or slow-term or anything else. So if you look up under Project BioShield and you look in Wikipedia at about the 3rd paragraph down, it will tell you we can't do this. So we're going to do it under the animal rule. I've got into arguments with people that say, no, you're misunderstanding it. I don't think that I am at all.
Organizational chart, though that is by design. Most FDA officials are barred from participating formally in Operation Warp Speed over concerns that their involvement would conflict with their Mission to impartially review eventual vaccine applications. The one major exception is Janet Woodcock, who took a temporary leave as head of FDA's drug center to lead the initiative's efforts on.
Now here, look at this coming up. It says BARDA plays perhaps the most head-scratching role in Warp Speed.
Leave as head of FDA's drug center to lead the initiative's efforts on therapeutics. BARDA plays perhaps the most head-scratching role in Operation Warp Speed. The organization's acting director, Gary Disbrow, a camera-shy bureaucrat who was catapulted into the job after the ouster of his boss, Rick Bright, is listed as co-leading the vaccine Warp Speed. BARDA.
So according to them, BARDA and the guy that runs BARDA and Matt Hepburn, the guy that was on DARPA with the biosensors, now this is great too, because after he left Warp Speed, he now has moved up and went back on to a higher program for these biosensors.
BARDA has been largely sidelined in all of this, one pharmaceutical industry.
See, it says BARDA has been sidelined in all of this, has been largely sidelined, right? It says one pharmaceutical industry source. But the guy that owns the silicon dioxide container says that he meets with them weekly and has hour upon hour long meetings with them.
Been largely sidelined in all of this, one pharmaceutical industry source told Stat. Ganti of CO2, however, told Stat that the company deals primarily with BARDA for all of its Warp Speed related questions. Mango also told Stat BARDA officials meet with Warp Speed officials daily to make sure contracts are moving along. BARDA also appears to be fronting a large chunk of the funding for the Warp Speed initiative, alongside the joint.
That's because if you look and you look at the group that released all of the contracts, most all the contracts for Warp Speed, which is I think KEI. I'll show you here in a minute. In 2018, where BARDA is sitting next to Fauci, and they're sitting next to the whatever you call it, the MCO, the guy that was running the consortium, and I'll let you hear for yourself what they say.
For the Warp Speed initiative, alongside the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Defense.
And there's another one. If you go along to the Executive for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense, you get back to Ted Turner. You get back to ex-CNN head, ex-WCW head, you know, a guy down in Georgia with Jane Fonda, who dropped $1 billion off at the United Nations and then started the Nuclear Threat Initiative with Sam Nunn. He owns 12 million acres, by the way. He's the largest landowner in the United States. Second by Bill Gates, who's the largest now agricultural landowner. But then you'd have to get into the FAO under the United Nations or the OECD and start having a look at what all that is all about.
Defense. About the author, Nicholas Florko. Reporter, Commercial Determinants of Health. Nicholas Florko reports on the commercial determinants of health. Nicholas.Florko at statnews.com.
Okay, I'm going to go real quick and we'll go over and we'll see what BARDA and Fauci and them had to say. Before I get there, though, let's just look at what this gentleman told these people at Davos that they invited out there here a couple of days ago.
On the domestic side, if a Trump administration comes in this time, they've been preparing for it. You've been helping them prepare the Republican Party to prepare for this in a way that it was not prepared in 2017. So could you tell me what kinds of people, and if you've got some names, put them out there, do you think might be the kinds of people that a Trump administration, we're using that assumption, would pull in on the big domestic agenda elements, from chief of staff, treasury, maybe national security? I know, well, maybe I should leave that for Walter. I'm coming to you in a minute on that. But on the domestic side, are there people all lining up? Is there a community out there thinking, right, this is the opportunity, we want to get it right? What kind of people do you think would be stepping forward?
There are. I will disappoint you, Robin, and not mention names. That's ultimately up to the president-elect and his or her staff, right? So I won't be presumptuous. But I will say the kind of person. The kind of person, and I'll be candid here because I think I've been invited here to be candid. The kind of person who will come into the next conservative administration is going to be governed by one principle, and that is destroying the grasp that political elites and unelected technocrats have over the average person. And if I may, I will be candid and say that the agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object all of them wholesale. Anyone not prepared to do that and take away this power of the unelected bureaucrats and give it back to the American people is unprepared to be part of the next conservative administration.
Okay, that's very clear. And as you said, I think one of your tweets on the lead up to here was also that you're here to usher the Devoisie into early retirement. So I'm heading that way already, so I'm probably all right on that front. But thank you, and we appreciate your candor and being candid. Otherwise, this panel is not going to make sense. So thank you very much for that.
And goodbye.
Similar kind of thing. We might all be ushered on this panel. We might be ushered out. And you said yourself a minute ago, anyone who's kind of not with the program is not going to be in an administration. One thing that Davos, you might say, and the people come here stand up for, is liberal democracy. So if the idea that's going to be swept under the table is part of the idea, hopefully that's not what he means. What do you mean? What do you think he means by retribution?
Well, it's laughable that you would, or anyone would describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy. It's equally,
standing up for it.
It's equally laughable to use the word dictatorship at Davos and aim that at President Trump. In fact, I think that's absurd. But I'm going to step aside from that constructive criticism and instead answer your question.
Yep.
And I'm going to be substantive here. President Trump, if he's the next president, for that matter, I think whoever the next conservative president is going to take on the power of the elites, which I mentioned earlier. But the thing that I want to drive home here, the very reason that I'm here at Davos, is to explain to many people in this room and who are watching, with all due respect, nothing personal, but that you're part of the problem. Political elites tell the average people on 3 or 4 or 5 issues that the reality is X, when in fact reality is Y. Take immigration. Elites tell us that open borders and even illegal immigration are okay. The average person tells us in the United States that both rob them of the American way of life. They're right. President Trump will take that on behalf of the average American. Elites also tell us that public safety isn't a problem in big American cities. Just travel to New York or Washington or Dallas, Texas. The average person will tell you that the lack of public safety damages not just the American way of life, but their life. President Trump will take that on. Thirdly, I guess the favorite at the World Economic Forum is climate change. Elites tell us that we have this existential crisis with so-called climate change, so much so that climate alarmism is probably the greatest cause for mental health crisis in the world. The solutions, the average person know, based on climate change are far worse and more harmful and cost more human lives, especially in Europe during the time that you need heating, than do the problem and the problems themselves. Fourth, 2 more here, Robin.
Okay.
The fourth, China. The number one adversary, not just to the United States, but to free people on planet Earth. Not only do we at Davos not say that, we give the Chinese Communist Party a platform. Count on President Trump ending that nonsense. And fifth, as we sit here, another supranational organization, the World Health Organization, is discussing foisting gender ideology upon the global South. These are practices that are under review, if not being rejected, by countries in Northern Europe. The new president, especially if it's President Trump, will, as you like to say, trust the science. He will understand the basic biological reality of manhood and womanhood. And do you know why? Not because of retribution, not because he's a dictator, but because he has the power of the American people behind him. And it's connected to Senator Portman's excellent point that in addition to needing a vigorous executive, we look forward to having the popular will inform both the House and Senate in 2025 to pass laws on all of those issues and many others. Ultimately, Robin, I think President Trump, if in fact he wins a second term, is going to be inspired by the wise words of Javier Milei, who said that he was in power not to guide sheep, but to awaken lions. That's what the average American and the average free person on planet Earth wants out of leaders.
Very clear points, and that'll give a chance for everyone to come back, including on the Q&A and any particular issues they want to challenge. The one thing I will challenge, we can come back to it later on, Kevin, is what will be the mandate of the American people if, A, the mandate tends to be not a plurality of the vote.
If he wins the election, the mandate's clear.
Kevin keeps saying if he wins the election. Can I ask Kevin, is there any conceivable way in which if he loses the election, he will accept that he's lost the election, or whether you would accept that?
What was the last part?
Would you accept if he loses the election that he's lost the election, or would it be like last time?
If we're sure that there's election integrity, but I'm not sure that we can be.
But yeah,
I think you've answered my question there.
We're not going to get the end of that one, so park that one for the moment.
Mr. Roberts, so day one of the Trump presidency, what does he do? What are the first 2 or 3 actions that he does?
Thanks for the question. As soon as what I hope is a very brief inaugural address concludes, and brief not because what would be in it would be unwise, quite the opposite, but because our country's on fire, there needs to be pushing through Schedule F civil service reform so that the president can fire a good number of the unelected bureaucrats in the administrative state. The administrative state's the greatest threat to democracy in the United States, and we need to end it. The second thing is he needs to really confront all of the policies surrounding so-called climate change. We've had a great discussion here by Walter and Allison, who are excellent on that point, about focusing on fiscal policies that have nothing to do with wrong-headed and really harmful subsidies of wind and solar. We love wind and solar energy at Heritage. We just want them to stand on their own in the free market. And because that affects human prosperity, more than 1 billion people in the world have been lifted out of poverty in the last 35 years because of fossil fuels. The president is going to take that on. And the third thing that he's going to do, I think, and this would be a bit of a departure from his last administration, when he spent too much money, is really be focused on fiscal restraint, because we simply can't afford it. It's something that transcends the political left and the political right. And I can certainly tell you from the standpoint of Heritage, and all of us at Project 2025 will be zealously supportive of all 3 of those actions.
Thank you. Right. Sorry to do this for you folks. I'm over time. I'm going to get killed. Yeah, they really want us to stop. But you've got to do it. Biggest change about America by 2028?
Revitalize self-governance for Americans and the rest of the world.